I'm an anthropologist. My name is Dr. Kerrigan. Anthropology is the study of cultures, human cultures across time, space and geography. One of the interesting things about anthropology is that it doesn't necessarily look at judging people's behaviours from a moral standpoint of whether things are right or wrong, but instead it tries to understand the context of why people have certain types of behaviours, how culture perhaps over time has shaped them and their behaviours. So anthropologists are one of the teams of social scientists that study things like the cultures of intoxication, and we've studied cultures of intoxication, as I said, across different geographies and time spans. And in a recent discovery in northwest China, researchers unearthed 13 cannabis plants. What was interesting about this archaeological find, that these fully grown weed, plants, were around 19 to 35 inches in length. They were placed very strategically across the body of the person who was buried, and many of the archaeologists now suggest that they think that the actual cannabis sativa plants that they found are connected to a sort of shamanistic type of role, and that the man that was buried was a shaman. What was quite interesting as well is that they were able to not just radiocarbon date these cannabis kind of stalks, but there were also cannabis flowers still there that they were able to test to see whether or not that material was psychoactive, psychotropic, and what they found that it was. So that also added to the evidence that perhaps around 2,800 years ago, that in northwest China, the cultures there had used, perhaps for intoxication, perhaps for shamanistic type things, cannabis flowers, and sort of the experience that cannabis can give within their own sort of society. So I guess the anthropologist would describe that as we have evidence for at least 3,000 years of our human history of cannabis being used, not just for food, not just for rope and hemp making, but actually for exchanging people's experiences. Within all societies, you see some sort of legacy for human beings wanting to alter their states of mind. There's lots of literature that points out that when children are very young, they like to, run around in a circle and spin and get dizzy. That's also a way to sort of shift your headspace a little, to have an experience that sort of changes how your senses work in that moment. And I think, as adults, those sorts of experiences continue, except as an adult, you get exposed to other sorts of substances that may be, external to your own sort of physicality, which can induce these different experiences and states of change. We don't necessarily believe that the ganja is necessarily a problem within various societies. What we feel is more of a problem is ganja prohibition. And ganja prohibition throws up all types of issues, from violence to transnational drugs to corruption to black markets to ending people's lives, subjecting young men to prison terms, which can very heavily impact their outcomes. Once you've been kind of arrested for weed, it sort of impacts your ability to get good references, it impacts your ability to be a genuine member of society. And of course, if you get thrown into jail for these things, it exposes you to sort of a university of criminality based on the very simplistic idea that as a young person, you wanted to change your head experience. So we don't really look at those issues from a moral standpoint. And I think in many ways, a lot of societies that believe in prohibition of drugs sometimes are coming from a more moral point of view. And I think that moralistic culture perhaps echoes in from our colonial sorts of experiences, which kind of is a reflection of the global inequalities of racism. Why is it that in poor countries with majority black nations that marijuana is still now seen as this evil drug, when really drug prohibition emerges from our kind of membership of the UN and signing up to various charters that we ourselves never had any real input into making. I think in many ways some of our problems like capital punishment, corporal punishment, the prohibition of marijuana, I think one of the issues that our society is dealing with, and others may disagree, but I think one of the issues we're really dealing with is with morality. The Bible suggests these things are bad, and therefore we should follow that. And I don't think that you can make policy based on morality. I think policy needs to be based on evidence. What is the evidence? How can we better understand it? And once we realise, using that evidence, that there are unfair outcomes, they're unjust, and that they cause more problems than they solve, well then we should be an adult society, treat with that and understand how we can manage the problem rather than moralise about the problem. Because I think ultimately those who want to manage the problem and those who are moralising the problem actually want the same thing. They want a society where drugs aren't ruining people's lives, where black market kind of don't sort of merge, where guns and violence don't extend. But for that to happen, those with the power need to move closer to the idea of managing the social issue and the social problem of ganja.